Alright, we got another video lesson for you today. This time we're going to talk about the era of good feelings. We're going to talk about all the good feelings that are happening. We're going to talk about why. Think about the causes of the War of 1812. Think about the War of 1812 because it's going to tie into this important or critically, really. So, think about, for big brain question, how has foreign policy changed in the U.S.? Just think about that as we move forward. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Monroe's foreign policy. Today we're talking about how Madison's foreign policy leads to some domestic great feelings or good feelings. So we're going to be able to, while we're doing this, explain the regional interests that affected the debate and role of federal government in the early republic, and we'll talk about how. So let's get into this. Again, title is The Era of Good Feelings. This is the recorded session. First key point, quick key point, easy key point. James Madison's presidency is known for drastic change in American foreign policy that took place during it because there's a big departure from what the people before had done. So again, like always, if you need time on any of these slides, go ahead and pause as I'm moving because we're going to move through them pretty quick. So some highlights for Madison. You don't need to write this, but this is a lot of what's happening during his presidency, right? He's the fourth president. Sailors are still being impressed. There's alleged British influence on native attacks, and there's native wars. He fights the War of 1812, and a big domestic thing he did is he continues with the Bank of the United States, making a second national bank. So, the national perception. I like this painting. This is a 4th of July celebration in 1819. So, why would this celebration be so awesome and lively looking and everybody looks so happy? Why is everybody so happy in 1819? What's happening? Well, there's a few things happening, right? We won the War of 1812. Right, and we're feeling good. I mean, did we really win? Probably not, but technically Americans claim the victory. They feel like they won. There's only one political party in the United States, right? The Hartford Convention killed the Federalists. And to make matters even better, or, depending on how you look at it, people feel a sense of national pride. They're proud to be the United States because of multiple effects during the time. So everybody's feeling really good. In fact, they're feeling so good that this is called the era of good feelings. And let's get into the era of good feelings. So let's talk about some effects of the war, right? Foreign policy changes forever as a result. This is under Madison. We have a full-on war conflict with the European nation. It ends in a draw. That feels like a victory, right? In part because of this guy, Andrew Jackson, winning the last battle, and in a big way. The U.S. is respected. They're seen as a world power. And I put in part there because they're not feared like the big dogs. They're not looked at as a big dog, as a big powerful nation, but they're respected as an equal on the world stage, which is something they did not have before. And everybody's really happy about it. The U.S. will also increase their focus on manufacturing, specifically in the northern regions. Manufacturing is going to be a big deal moving forward. Manufacturing. It's going to continue. And it's a period of time where there's only one political party in the U.S. It's unity. There's a period of unity in the new republic. So let's get into all these good feelings. Let's move forward. So if you need time on any of those slides, you could pause, and we're going to get into the second key point. Domestically, Madison is responsible for helping the national economy and introducing domestic tariffs and another national bank. So how? How? Why? Well, the first Bank of the U.S. charter lapsed, which means it was going to expire, which it did, and it does expire, by the way. This is Hamilton's bank. This is one Hamilton set up. And it was going to end, so instead of maintaining the charter, which they weren't able to do because, Congress, Madison charters a second Bank of the U.S., which is able to keep going. Another big deal here is the Tariff of 1816, which is the first protective tariff for domestic industry. Now, if you don't know what protective tariffs are, we're going to talk about them a little later, so keep that in mind moving forward. So now let's get into the election of 1816. James Monroe will win the election by a landslide, and he'll become, Daniel Tompkins will be his vice president. Rufus King was the Federalist running. Again, the Federalists are not relevant anymore. They do not do well. So, James Monroe. He was president during the era of good feelings, which is most of his presidency. His cabinet includes future President John Quincy Adams, future Vice President John C. Calhoun as Secretary of War, and Treasury William Crawford. He is president during the Panic of 1819, which is an economic panic, which we'll talk about a little later. He is also there for the Missouri Compromise, as well as some foreign policy issues, specifically the Adams-Onis Treaty, and very famously the Monroe Doctrine, which the Monroe Doctrine is for tomorrow's discussion. So is the Adams-Onis Treaty. We're going to talk about some of the domestic stuff today, though. So let's move on. Key point 3. Key points are coming fast. James Monroe is president during the era of good feelings. The era of good feelings is a time when the U.S. was a one-party nation. National pride is also on the rise. People are feeling really good about being American. So, after the demise of the Federalist Party's relevance, we have a one-party system. This era is known as the era of good feelings. You just wrote this. You don't have to write it again. However, you do need to add, if very soon, like it doesn't last very long, last couple of years, the Democratic-Republican Party will split into Democrats and Republicans. Again, it will not last long. It'll happen like right as Monroe's presidency is ending. It will not last very long. You'll find Democrats, you'll find Republicans coming up afterwards. But let's talk about the Marshall Court. There are two critical main Supreme Court cases during Monroe's presidency. First one is McCulloch versus Maryland, and it's about the Bank of the United States, which is proven constitutional under the necessary and proper clause, meaning it's necessary and proper, very broad on purpose. States cannot tax the federal bank. The national bank is above state banks. It's the supremacy clause, and the supremacy clause basically states that the word of the federal government is stronger than any state. That's what that means. So add supremacy clause to your terms. Then you have Gibbons versus Ogden. Gibbons versus Ogden increases the federal government's interstate commerce authority. Right? The supremacy of a federal court decision is established because basically what happens in Gibbons versus Ogden is there's two different merchants and they're competing over who can use a certain stretch of river in New York. One has permission from the federal government, the other has permission from the state. And they're fighting over who has permission to use that piece of river. It goes all the way to Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court says the guy with the federal permission can use the river, the guy with the state permission cannot. Because the federal court's decision outrules and outweighs the state one. So, Marshall again increasing the power of the federal government. So we're going to go ahead and move on and talk about Monroe's presidency, which is full of drastic shifts and decisions between domestic and foreign policy plans. Again, more of what you need. So let's get into those domestic issues that are going to come up. So, when you talk about domestic policy in the United States during Monroe's presidency and even beyond, you cannot talk about it without talking about the Great Triumvirate and what those people are and what they mean. So, in the West, from Kentucky, you have Henry Clay, the gentleman from Kentucky. In the South, from South Carolina, you have John C. Calhoun, future vice president. And in the North, from Massachusetts, you have Daniel Webster. These are very important political figures in their eras. We're going to talk about them individually. So, first up, Henry Clay. He's from Kentucky. He represents the West. He was a slaveholder, and he was a Democratic Republican and a war hawk. He will serve as Speaker of the House. He will be a major influencer in the American system, in the Missouri Compromise, during the nullification crisis, during the wars against Jackson and the National Bank, and the Compromise of 1850. What you need to get down are a couple of his key attributes, right? His accomplishments. You don't need all of them. I would get that he's from Kentucky, that he was a slaveholder, and then I would get the things he participated in, as well as the last couple. Right? You don't need to necessarily know that he was in the House and in the Senate. You know that. The thing about Henry Clay, what will make him unique, is he's kind of like the bridge between the North and the South. Being from the West, being a slaveholder who will publicly kind of say that slavery needs to go away while still owning slaves, a little bit of that, 19th century American hypocrisy coming into place. He knows what both sides want, and he's really good at giving both sides what they want and meeting in the middle. He's part of the reason why the Civil War keeps not happening, if that makes sense. There's a couple of times we'll talk about as we move forward where it's almost going to happen, but he keeps it from happening. There's a couple of times where the tension's going to explode and he kind of wraps it all up. The analogy I like to use is imagine that you're on a boat in the canoe in the middle of a lake, and the North and the South. It's Henry Clay, and then it's the North and the South, right? 3 people. Well, the North and the South keep punching holes in the boat, and Henry Clay's the only guy that can fix it. He's got the flex tape, and he's fixing the boat. But at one point in 1851, he's going to die, and when he dies, the flex tape goes with him. He takes it overboard, and he dies. And now the boat's there, and it's going to sink, and that sinking is the Civil War. So add on your Henry Clay section. He is able to communicate with the North and the South and give them both what they want. He's able to come up with all these compromises that we're going to talk about. So keep that in mind. And then we're going to talk about Daniel Webster from the North. Right? He's a former Federalist. He was a lawyer, big fan of the Constitution. And basically what you need to know about Daniel Webster. So again, just get a couple of the things he's a part of, right? Nullification Crisis. He will serve as Secretary of State, Compromise of 1850. Is that he's like the voice of the North. He's anti-slavery. He's pro-industry. He does not believe in like agricultural society. He likes tariffs. He likes things like that. So when you think Daniel Webster, you need to think ultimate Northerner. So Henry Clay is the guy that's right in the middle, right? He's the ultimate compromiser. Daniel Webster is the ultimate Northerner. Which brings us to John C. Calhoun, who is the ultimate Southerner. Right, from South Carolina. He's a war hawk, Secretary of War. He will be a vice president. He was a senator. He's only a part of the Compromise of 1850 for a pretty good reason, and he was a part of the Nullification Crisis. But, again, John C. Calhoun is the ultimate Northerner. Henry Clay is the ultimate compromiser. Daniel Webster is the ultimate Northerner. And John C. Calhoun is the ultimate Southerner. And the 3 of them make up like these great big ideas in the nation. And Henry Clay specifically is more like in the middle. So you need to know those guys. Henry Clay's nickname was the Great Compromiser. And with that being said, let's talk about the issues in Congress during this time. So, balance. You got my sweet meme there, right? Slave states and free states in perfect balance. And then Missouri shows up. So what does that mean? Well, up until, 1819, 1820, there's an even number of slave and free states, and it looks like it's going to stay that way. So there's balance in Congress, the House, the Senate. There's an even number of each state. But when a new state will be admitted, and every time a new state will be admitted after this balance is put in danger, at risk of being thrown off, right? And if the balance is thrown off, the North could say ban slavery, and the South couldn't do anything about it. So the balance is really important to a lot of these people. On both sides, because it's the same way of the South, the slave states get, a more favorable balance. So the balance is put in jeopardy, and the way that the balance will be restored is through something called the Missouri Compromise, a deal that is like made by Henry Clay, right? Because he's the compromiser. He knows what both sides want. So Missouri wants to enter as a slave state, and in order to do that, the new state of Maine, which used to be part of Massachusetts, which is just a bunch of territory during this time, will be added as a free state. And on top of that, the 3630 line in the Louisiana Territory will be established. And this is this red line here. And this is important, Missouri Compromise line, because it states that slavery is prohibited in territory north of the line, basically making all of this territory free. There is no slavery allowed here. Slavery is allowed by popular sovereignty in territories and in the states south of the line. So basically, states south of the line can have slavery, and the territories south of this line get to vote on whether or not they have slavery. So basically just the Arkansas Territory, when they apply for statehood, can vote for it. And this is important, because this line's basically what they're trying to do is get rid of slavery, lock it up, keep it from expanding, keep it from growing. I say growing. And when I say they, I mean Northerners, and I mean like policymakers. Now, as we move along, you'll find out that, there's going to have to be more and more deals, because as more and more states try to join after a certain time, especially out here when we get this new territory, these rules aren't going to apply anymore. And we're going to get into that, but I want you to keep that in mind. As of right now, 1820, slavery is locked into these areas that it's already at. And all of this new territory that hasn't even become states yet is going to be free. Keep that in mind. So that being said, we're going to go into another domestic plan This plan is the American system. So this is another Henry Clay brainchild, right? It's a plan to better the country economically, to strengthen it, make the country better and stronger and bigger. It was inspired by Hamilton's economic plans, and it has three parts, three fundamentals, and they are protective tariffs to protect industry, a national bank to keep the money flowing, and internal improvements / infrastructure, basically improving the roads and the infrastructure of the nation. So we're going to get into all of those, but you need to know what the American system was so we can move forward. So part one, protective tariffs. Purpose is to protect and promote domestic industry to generate revenue. If you protect domestic industry, which means American-made goods, they will make you money. That's in a nutshell. Support. The North supported it because industry is expanding. Raw materials are not subject to high tariffs and low input costs to northern industries, and revenue mostly subsidize infrastructure in the north. Basically meaning that with these tariffs, the northern industry paid for its own growth. South and west can benefit from northern consumption of raw materials and crops. So the places that are sending raw materials, they're still being bought and used, but they're being bought and used in the north. Problem. Manufactured goods will cost more to those southerners and westerners. Little to no tariffs on raw materials, cotton, meaning that southern cotton producers and farmers will see less profit, whereas the north will see more profit, southerners will see less profit. Imported manufactured goods are less expensive to ship than domestic manufactured goods. Southern states will pay the most for federal tariffs, so it'll benefit the north at the south's expense. And that is an opposition. That is something that people opposed, especially, particularly people from the South. So the Bank of the U.S. manages federal revenue, regulates national credit, facilitates commerce, stabilizes and regulates national currency. Basically, it makes the economy more stable and safe and secure. All right, and it's supported by bankers and the western and southern farmers because they're seeking credit. It avoids economic panic and worry because, again, the bank makes everything more stable. Now, there's opposition because there will still be people saying that it's unconstitutional, and because it appears like wealth is being consolidated among the wealthy bankers in the industrial cities. Like, it's looked at as a thing that's meant to benefit the North and nobody else in some places. So basically, it's the same opposition that Jefferson had to it. Now let's get into the last piece of the American system, which is internal improvements. I put in parentheses infrastructure because that's what's happening. What's going to happen? Roads, canals, harbors, turnpikes, all these things are going to be built up and made better. Why? So that way regional markets can connect together and it's easier to travel within the United States. This will subsidize federal revenue, land sales, tariffs, more things that will help make the government money. So that's the point of it. Who supports it? Well, it makes it better for people overall. The general good, public welfare, all of those things are made better. The opposition, well, it gives the federal government more power over the states. And it benefits the wealthy at the work of the common person, right? The wealthy merchant makes money at the expense or at the work of the common person who's doing the building. So that is it for me. Make sure you get your exit ticket done in Google Classroom. I will see you guys next time in class. Have a good one.